Good day, and thank you for tuning in to this new episode of a Microdose Diet. My guest today is Nick Kadysh. Nick is the CEO of PharmaAla Biotech, a publicly listed company, and is also the board chair at Psychedelics Canada. He's here to share more about PharmaAla's vision and its impact on the healthcare industry. My name is Peggy van de Plassche. I'm a former banker and venture capitalist, and I now speak and write about the psychedelic industry and the benefits of strategically microdosing psilocybin. I created the Microdose Diet, a 90-day plan for success and happiness. So you can follow my work on all social media, Substack, LinkedIn, YouTube, Apple Podcast, and Spotify. So Nick, thank you very, very much for being here today. It's really a pleasure to host you.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, yeah, that's very exciting. So I want to really dig right into it because we have a lot to talk about. So you're the founding CEO of PharmaAla Biotech. So tell us more about your business model, why also it's an important aspect of the healthcare industry right now.
Sure. Maybe I'll take those backwards. I'll start with why it's important, and then I'll talk about exactly what we do.
Perfect.
I think it's important because we traditionally, especially in Canada, but really all over the world, we're really not great at treating like mental illness of any kind. If you look at the amount of investment that has gone into sort of different modalities of care in healthcare, psychiatric care is always the bottom of the barrel. And I think my bias is always towards looking at things through a regulatory lens because that's my background. I think part of the reason for that is it's traditionally very, very difficult to prove a really solid effect in psychiatric conditions through the traditional clinical trial process. There's just, the human brain is too complicated. Psychiatric conditions are too difficult to treat. And so it's really, really important that we try to develop new treatments. And I think, psychedelics hold incredible promise for treating a number of psychiatric disorders, which is why in the last little while, we've seen so much interest and energy in writing about psychedelics. In terms of us as a company, we're a very simple business. So we basically just do two things. We are a GMP drug product manufacturer. What that means is GMP is good manufacturing practice. It basically means that we manufacture drugs for human use, right? Oh. Not for rodents, not for research. We manufacture drugs for human use. And the drug that we manufacture is MDMA. We're one of, I think right now, only two entities in the world that manufacture GMP MDMA, with the other one being MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, which is it is a charity with a for-profit social benefit corporation below it. And then there's us. And then the other thing that we do is we are an early stage drug development company. So we research and develop novel analogs of MDMA that have certain specific things that we look for. So we have a real focus on improving the safety profile of the molecule. We think that's important because then you can treat more people in different ways, different modalities of care. And then we also look for specific populations of concern. So, our lead drug candidate, which is called ALA-02, very exciting name, I know. In preclinical research, it was shown to be very effective in an autism model. So there are special mice that they're bred to show traits of autism. And our drug seems to work very, very well in those models. So that's an example of the kind of research that we do.
Okay, so just to come back to the first part of your business there, so who would be your clients then? Would it be for psychedelic assisted therapy, or is it for clinical trials? Or?
Yeah, I mean, clinical trials of psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. Yes, absolutely. So we just made our first batch in August. We're a very young company. We're only about 2.5 years old right now. And so our first batch almost exclusively went out to universities, like clinical researchers, scientists, basically. Some corporate researchers, but mostly universities. If you look at our client list, we are quite lucky in that we have a number of huge sort of university clients. And then starting in July, because Australia has now legalized medical psychedelics as of July 1st, we're going to be selling into that market as well, and that will go directly to patients.
Okay.
through their doctors. It'll go to doctors and then it'll go to patients. Yes.
Got it. So you're talking about Australia. I assume you're providing universities in North America?
It's a global market. So North America, Australia, we're trying to get into Europe, but Europe is a little bit challenging. It's a difficult regulatory environment.
Yes.
So yeah, it's global. Yeah.
Yes, Europe is a bit backward when it comes to looking at medication or drugs turned into medication.
Yes,
And
a little slow.
I'm from France. I'm sure you can hear that. And when I look at how backward the regulations are there, I'm just like, oh my God, what? It's like
tough.
20 years ago. Yeah, it's so weird. So close.
It's not even that they're backwards. It's just it's very bureaucratic. And so, the more layers of bureaucracy there are, the more difficult it becomes. Now, for us, our background at PharmaAla, my background and the background of most of the members of my team is regulatory. So, we believe that the best sort of companies in this space are the ones that understand the regulatory environment the best. But of course, we would say that.
It's always the same thing. You go in the direction you believe makes sense, So
of course, yeah.
I know what you mean. So you announced a very important milestone regarding your partnership with Filament Health.
Yeah.
So can you tell us more about the partnership and why? What does it mean for you as a company? What does it mean for the industry in general?
Sure. So there are generally two steps to making a pharmaceutical drug. I mean, there's lots of steps, but there's two major sort of steps. The first is you have to make your API, your active pharmaceutical ingredient. So in our case, that's MDMA, and it's like an MDMA powder, basically. And that's, I think, the hardest part is making the actual drug.
Yeah.
That is, in our industry, that is called drug substance or API. Then you have to put it into a form that people can actually take. So tablets or capsules or, whatever it may be, sometimes it's an oral suspension. So a liquid, if you think of like cough medicine, that's, an oral suspension. So in our case, the announcement you're referring to is Filament. It was our contract manufacturing partner for the manufacturing of MDMA capsules. And we announced that those had been released, meaning not just that we made them, but that they had gone through all of the release testing necessary for us to validate them, and then now they can be shipped to patients, basically.
Oh, that's, because, you're in such a I come from the financial services industry, so very regulated, but you're from extremely
regulated,
industry.
And it's often very even for people in pharma, when they realize how much more difficult it is to work with controlled substances rather than just regular pharmaceuticals. It's a very highly regulated space. Absolutely.
So that's, back to the point you mentioned earlier. So your background is originally in public affairs and government relations. So
and regulatory. Yeah.
Where did your interest in psychedelics come from? Why did you start the company? Tell us more about that.
Well, number one, I think you have to believe in these drugs in order to do this type of work. There are easier ways to make money, let me tell you. So yes, I absolutely believe in sort of the promise of MDMA in treating like a whole host of disorders. The data on PTSD developed by MAPS, to whom we all owe incredible sort of credit, is very persuasive. I mean, in their first phase 3 clinical trial, about 2/3 of the patients at the end of that trial were no longer diagnosed as having PTSD. So it is functionally I don't like to use the word cure, because PTSD is a natural response to trauma. It's not really it's not like an illness that you get, it is a natural sort of mental response to very bad situations that happen to people. But they basically sent those folks into remission for PTSD, which is amazing. In terms of my career, I mean, I've actually spent the last decade working in regulatory in healthcare. And if you look at my career, I've always worked at sort of the edge of what is permissible by health regulators. So, 15 years ago, I worked at Red Bull Energy Drink because the craziest thing any of us could imagine was caffeine in a little can. And I spent time working in medical devices at General Electric. I spent time working as an executive at Juul Labs, the vaping company. 5 years ago, vaping was the most that anyone could imagine. Exactly. And I think today, psychedelics are sort of that next sort of wave of products that are going to be entering the market. But I definitely believe that the benefit that these molecules could have for people are pretty remarkable.
Yeah, and that was really your impetus to start the company. To your point, there is a way to make money. It's really your belief that people should have access to these drugs because or medication, I should call them. We should start calling them drugs.
No, I mean they're drugs. They are drugs, but I don't think that we should think of drugs as a bad word. I mean, we get prescribed drugs by the pharmacist. When you take Tylenol, that's a drug. These are all drugs.
Yeah. It's funny you say that because there is so much stigma and it's also the word in English that is the same for both. If I use the French word, it's different. Drug is drug, so you don't have oh, what are you telling me?
Yeah.
So that's a bit more complicated, and I'm sure you must have faced, but that's probably something I want to ask you as well. That stigma of well, why on earth are you going on the psychedelic space? I mean, I know that for me, going from financial services to that space, people are just like, oh my God, she fell off.
What are you doing?
Yeah, exactly. So what was the answer, I would say, the reaction from people when they saw you going in that direction?
So look, on the one hand, I will say yes, there is a certain amount of stigma. And generally speaking, what I say to people is we can never forget that the difference between a controlled substance, an illegal drug, and a legal pharmaceutical, this isn't something that was sort of passed down by like God or nature. These are human decisions, right? Exactly. Like there's a list that the government keeps of drugs that they consider to be controlled, and those are a product of people just working, right? And so there are lots of examples of things that we consider controlled or restricted drugs that are both very, very useful medically and incredibly terrible for society when they're used illegally. And the best example is opioids, right? Like if you go to the hospital and you have surgery, you will almost certainly be given fentanyl. Exactly. And it will help you recover, and you will be in less pain, and you will have less inflammation. It was developed as a medicinal molecule, right? Developed by Janssen. All of these psychedelic molecules, despite the fact that they may be misused in sort of recreational use, that doesn't mean that they have no purpose medically. They could have incredible applications medically, and we shouldn't forget that, in my opinion.
Thank you. No, I really like, it's good to bring that context.
Yeah.
Because I think, unfortunately, over the 50 years, the context have been forgotten. And to your point, it seems to me that very often people think, yes, it's coming from God. This is,
yes, it's a controlled substance, right? Like we can't touch it. Yes, of course it can change. Everything can change. And look, what happened with cannabis in Canada, I don't think that the cannabis industry is anything like psychedelics. No. I think they're completely different. But the one thing that the cannabis industry did do is it made people realize that we can decriminalize this drug and make it sort of available to people, and the sky doesn't fall. It's not the end of the world. Everything is kind of the same.
Exactly. As long as you have alcohol freely available, I'm trying to figure out what is the good in that, and just I like my glass of wine, and I'm like, okay, psychedelic is actually bringing me a lot of good, and yet misused is not.
Exactly.
I don't know if there is any.
Oh, listen, look, the drugs, having worked in this space for a very, very long time, the drugs that have the most negative impact on society are invariably legal ones. So alcohol has a remarkable cost, right? Like alcoholism, domestic assault,
exactly.
Like incredible costs, right? Yeah. But we have learned with time that banning alcohol imposes even more social costs, right? So it's often very easy to search for simplistic solutions. Let's say, like cigarettes are bad. I don't want anyone to smoke. But if you ban cigarettes, people will still smoke. They'll just smoke, illegal cigarettes.
Yeah.
So I very much trend towards, as a public policy matter, I think that legal, regulated drugs are safer for the broad swaths of society than illegal black market drugs.
Exactly. And, I think the paternalistic model as well to tell you what you should or shouldn't put at some point. I'm like, I don't know. I think it's very backwards. Like
we're human. If you tell us not to do something, we're probably still gonna do it.
on top of that. So where do you see the industry going? Because there is a lot of trials, changing regulations, capital flowing in the company. So where do you see that coming? But also, what is the impact from your perspective on the patients and the healthcare system?
Well, look, my bias is, as you know, regulatory. So everything is going to have, the answer to everything is just regulatory. So in terms of the capital, I think we've seen a couple of things happen. One is we saw at the start of the pandemic, huge amounts of capital go towards psychedelic companies. And I remember at the time arguing in the Financial Post, like in the newspaper here in Canada, that investors saw this as cannabis and it wasn't. Right. And I was trying to warn investors, like, this is not cannabis, which is really like cannabis is kind of like agriculture. This is not agriculture. This is biotech. And so biotech has very long timelines. You need to prove things with science. You need to do clinical trials. It takes time. It's very expensive. And then, but there was these massive capital inflows. People, jumped on this bandwagon. And then they realized that it was actually going to take years and years and years to develop some of these treatments. And then we had sort of a bubble, and the bubble popped. So now you have a lot of psychedelic companies with very, very low valuations. And I find it very, very funny. I remember at the time, when we started the company, we sort of said, well, we're going to, I believe I'm a relatively conservative person when it comes to building a business. So I said, we need to have two parts. We need to make future products, and we need to have a product that we can sell to make money today, because I don't believe in just like burning investor capital all the time. And people were like, that's so dumb. You should just raise a lot of money and develop products, and don't worry about starting a business. You don't need to make money. There'll always be more investment, and it's fine. And then, of course, interest rates went up, and now there is no more investment. And now the same people are like, oh, you were so smart. How did you know? And I'm not I'm not that smart. I'm very conservative by nature. And so anyway, so that is, I think the future for the next little while, until sort of the interest rates calm down and maybe we go back to a low interest rate environment, I think that companies will need to have a product that they can sell. It doesn't have to be the best product in the world, but you need to have something to offer people, because I don't think investors are interested in, if your business plan is, I'm going to raise $500 million, that's going to be tough.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so your business model and all the different business models we see out there, so what do you think is going to be the impact of all of that on the healthcare system? Do you think big pharma is going to be displaced? Of course not, but what?
No, definitely not. No.
Exactly. But what's your thought on the industry, but also the patients? Because
I mean, look, you definitely have to keep patients in your mind, because that's what will determine whether we are successful as an industry or not. Look, I think a couple of things. Number one, this is a very, very different modality of care than most. This is not like traditional pharma is, here's a pill, take your pill, that's it. That's like sort of the totality of our interaction. Here you're looking mostly at therapy assisted protocols. So you're taking a drug and then you're sitting with your therapist. I think that it's highly effective. But the other interesting thing about it is it's not about managing symptoms. It's about curing, right? Like actually making sure that people don't have these conditions moving forward. So I think especially in countries with single payer healthcare systems, like Canada, if I was just talking to somebody about that this morning, imagine somebody with post-traumatic stress disorder. Generally speaking, people get PTSD between sort of 20 and 40 years of age. Very rare that people get it later in life because we become less risk-taking as time goes on. And so if you think about somebody who sort of gets PTSD at like 20 or 30, the majority of their working life is now at risk. And so the cost to the healthcare system, to insurers, to everybody is incredible. Not to mention the personal cost to the patient is just monumental. And so I was asked this morning whether I thought that $20,000 or $30,000 was a reasonable amount to pay for a full sort of PTSD treatment with MDMA. To which I'd say, no, it's high, yes. But if you stack that against like 30 years of costs of being sick with PTSD, no, it's a very small amount to pay, right? Both for the government, the healthcare system, and for the patients themselves, it all becomes very, very reasonable. And when you think about sort of the cost breakdown, the drug costs very little. It's the therapy that costs a lot. But we don't question the cost of therapy anywhere else. If you have PTSD now and you say I'm going to therapy, nobody says, "Oh, whoa, that's so expensive," right? Of course you go to therapy. What else could you possibly do, right?
That's a good point. It's absolutely not the drug in this package. The drug is a drop. The
drug is like 10% of the total cost, maybe even less, right? It's the therapy, but like we have to pay people for their time, and therapists are highly skilled professionals that are doing important work. So
I'm just putting things in context, which totally. I think is very interesting. So for the healthcare providers, meaning big pharma, one of the challenge, and you pointed out in your comment, is that they've been treating symptoms, which is quite fantastic because it's recurring revenue. Death do its part, and at the same time, because taking whatever medication for a long time, you're going to have other problems, side effects. So I tell you one pill for 50 years, and then I had 5 more to come. Side effects. So I mean, it's the golden goose. So I'm sure they're not very enthusiastic at that idea of losing patients. What do you see?
I don't know. Maybe yes, maybe no. I don't know. I've never actually worked in pharma before. This is my first sort of, I've worked in other industries that are healthcare regulated, like medical devices, but I've never worked in pharma. I don't know what the pharmaceutical industry looks at, how they look at psychedelics, but I can tell you that these are, generally speaking, large and very well capitalized companies. And if tomorrow they see that MDMA, as an example, is being used to treat a whole bunch of patients and it's being successful, then they'll invest. It's that simple. I mean, they're not, I think generally speaking, my impression of pharmaceutical companies is they go where the wind is blowing. And so for the last 2 years, it was vaccines, and that's great. And then if tomorrow it's psychedelics, they'll invest in that too.
But the thing is, vaccine was brand new. Here you're still cannibalizing some of your business, which was, highly, I would say, profitable because you develop the drug and then people stay on that for decades, So I'm looking at it from my investor ad, finance ad, and I'm like, I'm quite curious to see all the provider of, Prozac and all these drugs will look at that.
Well, look, I can give you an example. So Otsuka Pharma, which is a mid-size pharmaceutical company based out of Japan. So it's not Pfizer, but it's a big company. They did a development deal with one of our partners, Mindset Pharma, that was worth, I think, $5 million. And they came into that fairly early. So that's a good indication that pharma is sort of sniffing around and looking for. I mean, look, they're looking for companies with good science, good intellectual property, the ability to take a drug from preclinical all the way through to phase 3. But I think you'll start to see, it's still a young industry. So I think you'll start to see, as time goes on and sort of the best companies sort of accelerate, you'll start to see pharma jumping in more and more.
Acquisitions and this type of thing. That makes sense. We're almost out of time already. Do you have any parting words, anything you want to make sure the audience, remember from our conversation?
No, this has been great. Look, I will leave this with, like every other conversation. I'm inherently biased, right? I really think that regulatory is sort of the driver of this industry. And so I would just caution everyone that when you're looking at companies, if you're interested in a company and you're thinking about, hey, maybe I should invest in this company, make sure they know what they're talking about when it comes to regulatory. This is what will determine whether they're successful or not, in my opinion, of course.
That's great, because to your point, I think the focus might usually be the scientific side. But if
science is important too. But if you can't, if you can't actualize it, exactly.
I saw the same thing in financial services, where people came with, some business model. I'm like, hey, that's never going to be, like allowed. So you might have the best tech and the best investment mind, but that's never going to fly. So I hear what you're saying. It's a necessary condition.
Correct.
It's not enough, but it's a necessary condition. That's not going to get you where you want to be, but that's going to block you from getting where you.
Good science is necessary, but not sufficient.
Exactly. Well, I think that's going to be the title.
That's it.
Thank you.
Don't tell all the scientists who I work with, please.
They're necessary, but still,
they are necessary. They are very necessary.
It's a good place to be. Well, Nick, thank you so much. It was fun and like super insightful. I'm sure everyone's gonna love it. And wishing you a lot of luck with the business, a lot of success, and looking forward to future conversations as you guys get more and more successful, and as you're launching more and more products. So thank you for your time.
Sounds good. Thanks, Peggy. Great to see you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.